from Southern California. This is Mindset, mental health news and information. I'm your host, James Curtis. On today's show.
So we're talking about the necessary things you should know about your therapist, and we've gone over the first two. The first is credentials, and the second one is what is your therapist's scope of practice. So the third is ethics.
That is the voice of Noah Rubinstein. He is the founder and CEO of the online therapist referral site called goodtherapy.org. Now, back in September of last year, Mindset looked at and explored the topic of how to pick a therapist, featuring one of several interviews that I had with goodtherapy.org founder and CEO Noah Rubinstein. And in those discussions, Noah laid out over a dozen discussion points on what he called the necessary things you should know about your therapist. So today, we're going to revisit a different portion of those discussions. We're going to hear about the ethical and therapeutic significance of something called dual relationship. It should be avoided at all costs whenever possible, and why your therapist should talk to other therapists about you and about themselves. But first, this news from the Mindset Report. The Mindset Report available online at mindsetreport.com. The Mindset Report, your most comprehensive online source for mental health news. Today's Mindset Report is underwritten by Responsibility, a complete guide to bystander intervention by Alan Berkowitz, who is committed to the idea that the solution to health and social justice problems requires that we engage as bystanders. Responsibility is available online at lulu.com. Lulu spelled L-U-L-U. And if you like what we're doing here at Mindset, log on to our website, mindsetshow.com. Go to the Support Us tab and shop our affiliate vendors there. You can find everything from electronics to vitamins. And for a limited time, our vitamin affiliate vendor, Sport Formula, is shipping free samples. It's a great product. I've used it for years. And to get your free sample of Sport Formula, go to mindsetshow.com, click on the Support Us tab, and then click on the words, get your free sample of Sport Formula. You'll find those words in that link above the Sport Formula banner on the top right-hand side of that page. Purchases through our website help support our programming. From U.S. News and World Report, author and award-winning journalist Gabrielle Glaser has a message for people who struggle with alcohol dependence. It might be time to abstain from Alcoholics Anonymous. After having done extensive research on the program, she says that the 12-step program has little basis in science. Glaser reports her findings in The Atlantic in a story entitled The Irrationality of Alcoholics Anonymous. A report in Scientific American discusses new research out of Carnegie Mellon that indicates feeling connected to others, especially through physical touch, protects us from stress-induced sickness. The research adds to the large amount of evidence for the positive influence of social support on health. Interestingly, social support may be beneficial for the giver as well as the receiver. And on the flip side, loneliness and having a small social network corresponds with a lower antibody response to the influenza vaccine, and socially isolated patients with coronary artery disease have a lower survival rate than socially connected patients. And taking that concept one step further, Time magazine reports a new study in the journal Perspectives on Psychological Science. Loneliness kills. That's the conclusion of a study by Brigham Young University researchers who say that they are sounding the alarm on what could be the next big public health issue on par with obesity and substance abuse. Researchers determined that the subjective feeling of loneliness increases the risk of death by 26%. And finally, this from runnersworld.com. You can think your way to faster performance times. Psychological techniques like mantras can increase endurance performance. This according to researchers at England's University of Kent School of Sport and Exercise Sciences. Think mantras, positive self-talk, goal setting, imagery, hypnosis, and similar types of psychological training. For details on these and other mental health stories, mental health news stories, check out the Mindset Report online at mindsetreport.com. We're back in just a moment with today's topic, therapist, ethics, checks and balances. Welcome back to Mindset, Mental Health News and Information. I'm your host, James Curtis. On today's show, we're revisiting our occasional series on how to pick a therapist, the things you need to be thinking about when you're considering going to a therapist, or if you're already seeing a therapist, some checks and balances, some points you want to verify, to research, to figure out if indeed you're in the right place, and some tips on what to do if things aren't going exactly like you think they should. This doesn't mean that you need to dump your therapist or get rid of them or run screaming in the opposite direction, but certainly to give you more confidence about how to proceed through that relationship and get the most out of it, and make sure that the bottom line of your health, your safety, and your therapeutic needs are indeed being met. Here's Noah Rubenstein, goodtherapy.org, on the first point for today's topic.
So we're talking about the necessary things you should know about your therapist, and we've gone over the first two. The first is credentials, and the second one is what is your therapist's scope of practice. So the third is ethics, and really what you want to know is, does your counselor adhere to ethical principles such as boundaries, dual relationships, confidentiality? And ideally, it's important to check with the state licensing board to see if there have been any complaints or if there's a history of a license suspension or revocation, and if so, to find out why. Therapists certainly make mistakes sometimes, and there are false positives. There are therapists that are falsely accused of things, but I think that's less common. But you want to have a counselor that cares about ethics, that cares about doing the right thing, that understands that it's about meeting the client's needs, that really works in the spirit of being the guardian of the client's self. So there are numerous ethical guidelines or codes of ethics designed to educate therapists and really to reduce harm. The four main professional organizations include the AAMFT, that's the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the APA, the American Psychological Association, the American Counseling Association, and the National Association of Social Workers, and they all have their own code of ethics. So, and these codes clearly outline rules of conduct, expectations, and the limits of psychotherapy for therapists. And for me, one of the most important guidelines or principles that's discussed in all ethical codes is the issue of dual relationships. And this is really important, and I want to explain what it is as best I can. So when a therapist enters into a professional relationship with a client, the therapist is responsible for not having other relationships with that client, such as becoming friends or business partners or employing the client or being an employee of the client. There are some very small exceptions to this rule. For example, in some very small rural communities, it can be virtually impossible to avoid a dual relationship. So let's say you have a client, you live in a small rural community, and your client runs the local grocery store. You're going to purchase products from that grocer. Or let's say your client is the only mechanic in town and your car's broken down. Well, you, in that case, have to use that mechanic. But for the most part, in all of these codes of ethics, the expectation is for the therapist to be responsible for avoiding the dual relationship. Now, the principle behind the concept of dual relationship is really about whose needs are getting met. A therapist should be there to meet the client's needs for empathy and understanding, support, guidance, unburdening, healing, change, growth, all those good things, not other needs. The therapist should not be there to get their own emotional needs met. And when I say that, people say, well, what do you mean by emotional needs? Because obviously therapists do this kind of work because it's meeting their needs. I mean, you get something out of it. When you sit with someone who is trusting you with their deepest stuff, they're suffering, and you're witnessing them. It's an honor, it's a privilege to sit with them. When you work with someone, let's say, who has never, that has been self-critical their entire life and has never really had self-love, and you witness them learn to love themselves, wow, it is so rewarding. So therapists do get some needs met. The question is, at whose expense? So if a therapist is getting some need met at the expense of their client, then there's a problem. So when a counselor relies or depends on his clients to get those emotional, sexual, or financial needs met, that counselor or that therapist has crossed a boundary, and the therapy process is most often damaged or completely ruined. So let me give you an example. And I think I might have used this same example explaining something else in another interview, but what the heck, I'm going to use it again. Same example, but from a different angle. Okay. So I once had a client who really wanted to babysit for me. I had a newborn at home. She knew this because I had gone on a maternity leave, and she later identified through exploring it that by helping me, by offering her help, she felt like she would earn my love and appreciation. Because, many people go to therapy unknowingly wanting to get many of their emotional needs met from the therapist. Many people are seeking redemption. And the job of the therapist is to help the client to find that redemption inside of themselves, to teach them to fish for themselves, not to give people fish. So now there were a couple problems with this, with her wanting to sit for me. I mean, obviously that would be a dual relationship, but it would be a missed opportunity. Based on my work with her, I was pretty confident she was seeking to get this big emotional need met by helping me. And if I'd allowed her to babysit, I'd be giving her that fish. But the issue around the dual relationship is that it has the potential to thwart the unconditional positive regard in that client-therapist relationship. Now, that sounds like a bunch of psychobabble, so let me explain. So what if she wasn't a good babysitter, or something about her work needed to be addressed? So let's say, she was like a godsend. I really needed a sitter. I couldn't find someone, and I agreed to it. And then a conflict came up. It would affect my role as her therapist, to have her upset or reacting to my role as her employer, because in this situation I would be her employer, or it would make it difficult for me to hold that unconditional positive regard. So this is generally the issue with dual relationships. They negatively impact the therapeutic relationship. When you're seeing someone for psychotherapy, you're going to very deep places, and it's so important to hold that calm, compassionate state for our clients, to accept all of their parts, and the client is used to having that from us. They know they can say anything and that we're going to find the good in it. Well, if a dual relationship or some conflict that occurs in a secondary dual relationship that we're having, it's going to ruin that unconditional positive regard. It's going to make it harder for that therapist to have the unconditional positive regard, and it's going to make it harder for the client to feel safe. The other relationship will taint the client-therapist relationship. So in order for therapy to work, there has to be enough self in the room. And this is something that my friend and colleague Richard Schwartz preaches, and in my experience, it's true. In order for change and healing to occur, there has to be enough self in the room. And self means that state of calm, compassion, curiosity. With ethics, I always recommend that a client look up the potential therapist on their state with their state licensing board to see if a therapist has a record or is under investigation. So most therapists aren't, but it's worth checking.
And that's why it's also important to deal with someone who is licensed, because there's that kind of oversight that can be checked.
Exactly.
Okay.
Enough self in the room. I love that phrase and that concept, and I really hadn't heard it before from anyone. And hearing it in the therapy context is, I think, absolutely huge. Enough calm, compassionate curiosity in the room to find something positive, and no matter what the individual who's seeking therapy says. And the big thing and the cool thing and the beneficially great thing about going to therapy, because I know some of those folks who may be even listening to this, or you may have friends or family who have discussed therapy or thought about it and shied away from it, or on the other end of the spectrum, absolutely won't do it because, you can talk to the friend, you can go to the bar, you can hang out with your girls, retail therapy, what have you. The big difference with therapy is, one, these individuals are trained, and it is absolutely confidential. You don't have to worry about hearing about this through the friend of the friend or the family member, and you're getting skilled feedback. On that proverb that he talked about, lest you are not, in case you're not familiar with it, I just looked it up online. Some sources say it's from China, others say it's from other places, and it goes something like, if you give a man a fish, he is hungry again in an hour. If you teach him to catch a fish, you do him a good turn. Or give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. That's the fish analogy, in case you hadn't heard it. I heard it before, but some people haven't. And here's one of my favorite ways that it's put.
Give a man a fish, and he'll eat for a day. Teach him how to fish, and he'll eat forever. Give a man a fish, and he'll eat for a day. Teach him how to fish, and he'll eat forever.
Thanks to Arrested Development, one of my favorite groups. But the basic idea is this. It is huge, it's important, and it carries a lot of weight. One of the things that, and I just want to give everybody a heads up, the show is a little short today because, as you can tell from listening to Noah Rubinstein, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff packed into what he has to say. And we're going to get to the second portion of the conversation that I had with Noah Rubinstein of goodtherapy.org in just a moment. But if you go to his website, because a lot of people, again, hesitant about therapy, heard bad stories, heard scary things happening between therapists and patients. One of the reasons, and this is on the About Us page on goodtherapy.org, that Noah Rubinstein, who is as nice as he sounds during the interview, started Good Therapy is to, and I'm quoting from the website, to protect people in therapy, to protect the practice of psychotherapy, and to support therapists who work in collaborative, empowering, and non-pathologizing, not sure what that means, non-pathologizing ways. The individuals who you'll find on goodtherapy.org, and it's not the only site that refers individuals to therapists and connects therapists, but I do know that goodtherapy.org screens individuals for licensing, for specialties, and the like. So whether you use goodtherapy.org or some other site, it really makes me no difference. If indeed you need it, find it. But these are some of the things you want to keep in mind as you're going about that task.
So we're discussing the necessary things you should know about your therapist. And the next one is what I call checks and balance. And the question that you should ask your therapist is, does he or she seek regular peer consultation? Most therapists spend lots of their own time and money getting regular, frequent consultation from other more senior therapists. And that might include both group consultation as well as individual consultation. It's pretty standard practice, especially for those therapists that are working in the isolation of private practice. Consultation serves a number of purposes. You can discuss your clients and their issues without disclosing identifying information. It doesn't break confidentiality to do that. And you get advice, you get feedback, you get reality checks and objectivity. You get help getting unstuck, because sometimes you're in the middle of something and you don't see it clearly, and getting that outside perspective can really offer some good ideas. And so sometimes you discover your own blind spots, and oftentimes therapists get their own stuff in the way. And this is why I think it's important for therapists to do their own therapy, because we're human too, and there are things that our clients say sometimes that trigger us, or things we can relate to. Sometimes clients come in and they're struggling with something that we've struggled with before, or that we're still struggling with. And sometimes therapists, when they can't get unstuck, or can't get their stuff out of the way, we'll have to refer a client out to another therapist. So the difference between a therapist doing their own therapy and a therapy going to consultation is that when you're doing therapy, you're working on your own stuff. You're working on your own parts. In consultation, you're discussing how to help your clients. Now, as you discuss how to help your clients, it's very common for therapists to become aware, I think if they're in good consultation, of their own parts and how some of their own stuff might be in the way or be creating a barrier. So when you identify in consultation some of your own stuff or some of your own parts that might be in the way of helping your client, then you can take that and see your own therapist and do your own work around that. And most therapists notice their own unfinished business as a result of helping people, and so here's just a sort of a descriptive example of what I mean by this. So on Monday, I might work with a person with a terminal illness, and that might force me to kind of face my own death anxiety. On Tuesday, I might work with a couple struggling with the same communication problems that I'm having in my own relationship. On Wednesday, I might meet with someone who's harboring shame, triggering a similar shame within myself that I hadn't tended to or noticed before. On Thursday, I might meet with a person and wind up feeling hopeless about helping them, causing me to even question my skills as a therapist. And on Friday, I might meet with a parent who reminds me of my dad, bringing up my own unresolved grudges. Ask any therapist, and if they don't disclose to you that, or if they don't agree with this, that they don't notice their own stuff, well, then I'd be concerned about, are they doing their own work and are they really in the process? Because very few of us have reached nirvana and have worked through all of our earthly stuff. We're all works in progress, and that's one of the big things I've been trying to communicate through goodtherapy.org is that therapists are people too. and are generally wounded healers that hopefully have done some of their own therapy and thus know how to really help people, but are still on the path themselves. So going to consultation, I'm talking a lot about going to therapy now, but the original point is that it's important for therapists to go to consultation to help get unstuck and to get advice and feedback, to get reality checks, objectivity. Even the best therapists benefit from the help of others. So it's important to ask your therapist if they consult with others and how often they do that and if it's important to them, because you don't want one of those therapists that works in a bubble, that exists on an island, because, I don't know. I just think checks and balances are good.
Checks and balances are outstanding. Again, Noah Rubenstein, he is with goodtherapy.org, talking about the third and fourth items on his list. There's actually about 15 items on that list, and through the course of the year, we're going to roll these out. If you want to get ahead of the discussion and read them for yourselves, you can go to the website. They are posted on the website. At least I've been told they were up there for a moment. If they're not, send me a note, and we'll try to address that for you. But the licensing issue is the first thing we talked about. That was back in September. Please visit, check that show out, and it has a lot of good information there. Scope of practice is the second one, where you're making sure that this individual really has the training and the experience in the area that you need help in. And these are questions that are perfectly and legitimately okay to ask point blank your therapist. Now, you may not want to do it on the very first visit. You may want to get a feel for the person, because like any other very close working relationship or dynamic, you want to see if it's a good fit and feel the person out. But after you've made that determination, these things should be on the top of the list to find out. The third one that we talked about today, the idea of ethics. Ethical violations that you can find out with a state board in the case of licensed therapists, which Noah highly recommends, and the idea of checks and balances. That's it. That's the show for today. I told you it would indeed be short, but it was dense for information and links to all of the information that we talked about on Mindset today. You can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Mindset Show page. We tweet at the handle @Mindset Show. And until next week, for Mindset Mental Health News and Information, I'm your host, James Curtis. Dare to see mental health differently, because understanding why we do what we do helps us all do better. See you next week.
Teach him how to fish and he'll eat forever. Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach him how to fish and he'll eat forever.